Hello and welcome. Today we will talk about the concept of socialization in source of information for all of us when we are children or when we're growing up during our childhood years. Socialization is the process of growing up, forming one's beliefs, and becoming the character that one is destined to eventually be during his or her lifetime. Thinking about the origin of one's personal beliefs and values is not always an easy thing to do because a variety of influences have helped shape these beliefs and values. Some of these influences were more impactful than others and may have actually been culturally based. These influences tend to take place in the socialization process of young children at a very early age, usually about 5 or 6 years of age, and then it continues obviously to our teenage years. Socialization is about how one learns to fit in and get along with others in society and the community. So the discussion of socialization basically refers to one's character as a person and how one becomes who he or she is as a result of growing up in a specific environment or culture, or sometimes in many different environments and cultures. Some people are socialized to have an open mind about new cultures, where others are conditioned to be very cautious when dealing with people from different cultures and ethnicities and even different genders in some cases. The socialization influences of such diverse conditioning can come from many sources, including your family, your education or schooling, media, peers, and maybe other sources like religion and so on as well. Good news is that there is a large group of people who have not been socialized negatively in society, and therefore they do not need any kind of diversity training or sensitivity training or cultural competency at this time. The sad news is that these individuals and these groups of people actually reside in beds or in hospitals throughout our society. You know who I'm talking about? Of course you do. They are newborns, perfect human beings who come into this world without any preconceived notions, biases, or assumptions about individuals who are different from themselves. The point is that no human being is born needing diversity training or cultural sensitivity training. In other words, as you know, an infant is not born with any racist, sexist, or other oppressive attitudes. Children are sort of like sponges, like cameras, like tape recorders. They're ready to welcome and experience every new natural phenomenon, sight, and sound they see, hear, or even touch on a day-to-day basis. They love to laugh and do so at an average of about 400 to 500 times every single day when they're given the opportunity. Children are curious about the world, about the future, and about the possibilities which may exist within this universe. They're always scanning the world with an unlimited imagination and obviously oftentimes with an abundance mentality. As children learn about the world, they receive information from many sources. We can say that children receive lots of good information and perhaps some misinformation as they grow and mature into adulthood. In other words, you and I receive lots of information and some misinformation as we socialize and live within our communities. Usually this misinformation is delivered without any malicious intent or harm, but often children may receive this misinformation about people who are very different from them. This misinformation is conveyed to them in an overt fashion or sometimes through more subtle ways, which we'll talk about in the coming days. Now let us discuss some of the major sources of information and how they may have had a very powerful effect on us as individuals during our childhood years or during our socialization. The major sources of information, as you may have already guessed, are, again, family, education, peers, and media. So we'll focus on those four, although there might be many others that could be very impactful on individuals at different times and stages in their lives. So let's look at family first, because family seems to be one of the most important sources of influence for most of us as we're growing up during our childhood years. It is certainly a very powerful influence on every single individual, regardless of his or her cultural upbringing or the environment where he or she lived. Many of us have perhaps thought of ourselves as a chip off the old block. What does that mean, chip off the old block? Well, from a personal experience and perspective, I am very much like my father in my actions and my beliefs and my values and day-to-day behaviors. Often when I answer my parents' phone, people think that I'm actually my dad. So they talk to me like I am my dad because I sound like my dad, I think like my dad, I talk like him. And my father is much like his father and so on. Basically, we learn from generation to act and believe like our parents. I was taught to love, to honor, and to respect my parents and learn through their wisdom. So therefore, their statements, their messages, their sayings have had a very powerful impact on me. And they tend to influence my thinking, my feelings, as well as my day-to-day behaviors. Sometimes I think about the circle of friends with whom my parents socialized, but more importantly, I think about those who were not included in this circle of friends or people that they interacted with on a day-to-day basis. For example, my dad is an engineer, so he was a university professor, and mostly my family interacted with engineers, with professors, with medical doctors, and other researchers in academia. So this is called the principle of social similarity in social psychology. This is why we tend to interact with those who look like us, think like us, and sometimes behave like us. This can result in groupthink and reduced diversity within the group, which can have some disadvantages, especially when complex issues need to be resolved quickly in today's obviously challenging world. These professional engineers and doctors were mostly all male, especially in the context of living in Afghanistan, where I was born. So this reinforced the cultural view of males working outside of the home and females staying inside the house, especially because my mother took care of us and did not have a formal job outside the house. So in my eyes, men were seen as the breadwinners and females were seen as homemakers during my childhood years. So consequently, my tendency was to act like those individuals we interacted with, think like them, play chess like them on a regular basis, and become an engineer or professor like them. My parents did not interact with individuals who were, for example, singers, comedians, and athletes, because most people in Afghanistan did not think of those professions as money-making fields. So again, we were not encouraged to go into those fields. The reality for most Afghans and South Asians and people of many other countries in developing economies are that comedy, singing, and playing sports have traditionally been considered as a hobby and basically to fill idleness and remove boredom, so which were not always taken seriously as professional work. Therefore, most children at a young age were told to become what? You guessed it. Become an engineer, become a teacher, or even become a doctor or in some field of medical profession. The point is that the family members are a major source of information, and most often we tend to become like our parents, like our caretakers, because they have a great influence on us.